Hello and welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're going to unpack a whole series of recent economic events, mostly stemming from the U.S., but definitely making waves globally.
That's right. And before we jump in, it's worth giving a nod to the excellent work of analysts like Jean Futol.
Oh, definitely. His YouTube channel focusing on analysis, clear criteria, interpretation, and just, common sense reflections. It's really valuable stuff.
Absolutely. And we're channeling that analytical spirit today, drawing from various YouTube sources that are tackling these pretty complex economic and political dynamics.
These sources give us different angles, different levels of analysis, which is great.
Exactly. And our mission really is to pull out the most crucial insights from all this noise, understand how these seemingly separate events, U.S. trade spats, Spanish politics, are actually connected.
And figure out what it all might mean for the global economy, right?
Precisely. It's about seeing that bigger picture.
Okay, so let's dive in, starting with the big one. The U.S. trade policy roller coaster, especially concerning China, but also hitting Europe.
Yeah, it kicked off with Donald Trump's initial, pretty stunning announcement of a 125% tariff on Chinese goods.
His justification, well, according to his Truth Social posts and statements from Scott Besson, was basically that China wasn't playing fair, disrespecting global markets.
But what's fascinating is how quickly that story changed. Just hours later, really.
Yeah, suddenly there's this 90-day pause, and tariffs dropped significantly down to 10% for the rest of the world. It felt abrupt.
It really did. And as several of the video sources we looked at pointed out, this quick reversal didn't exactly scream carefully planned strategy.
No, it didn't. And that's where this counter-narrative popped up, pushed quite strongly, actually.
You mean the idea that he was forced to backtrack?
Exactly. Driven by things like that tweet from Kimmel Musk, Elon's brother.
Ah, right. He called the tariffs an absurd tax, didn't he? Said it hurt American workers and companies.
Yeah, specifically mentioning companies like Tesla, which obviously relies heavily on Chinese components.
And wasn't it just like 3 hours after that tweet that Trump reversed course?
That's the timeline people point to. So do you think that kind of pressure from figures like Musk was the real driver?
It seems very likely. The speed of it suggests market panic, maybe pressure from influential people close to Trump, played a huge role.
It makes more sense than a sudden strategic rethink, maybe.
And then there's that other layer, the accusation, even if unproven, about potential insider trading.
Right. The claim that Elon Musk's funds might have benefited from knowing about the reversal beforehand, like one source put it, I have no proof, but no doubts either.
Quite the claim. It adds another complex dimension to the whole thing.
Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the EU wasn't just sitting back watching this unfold.
No, they reacted pretty decisively. They activated retaliatory tariffs, 25% on U.S. goods.
And in value was significant, wasn't it? Something like $81 billion rolled out in phases.
Exactly. And the list of targeted products was, well, quite varied.
I saw cigars, whiskey, shoes, furniture, car glass, cosmetics, even toilet paper, rice, corn, candy, chickens, eggs.
Essential oils, electronics, video games. It's broad sweep. What does that tell us, that strong reaction?
Well, it definitely signals that the EU isn't going to just accept unilateral U.S. trade actions anymore.
It feels like a demonstration of the EU acting as a unified economic bloc, flexing its negotiating muscle. A sign of that shifting global power balance we keep talking about.
So what about the impact back in the U.S. from all this friction? We heard talk about U.S. Treasury bonds.
Yeah, that's a key point. Bond yields reportedly went up, and there was this perception that T-bonds were losing some of their safe haven appeal.
Even J.P. Morgan commented on it, which, makes you take notice.
Right. When yields go up, it basically means investors want more return for holding the debt, often reflecting less confidence or more perceived risk.
So questioning the safety of U.S. bonds is a big deal.
It is. It suggests investors might be looking elsewhere, seeking assets less exposed to this kind of economic uncertainty.
And linking that to China. China holds a lot of U.S. Treasury debt, right?
Exactly. They're one of the biggest holders. So if China decided to sell off large amounts of those bonds, it could really shake things up.
How so?
Well, it could create volatility in financial markets, potentially push U.S. interest rates higher. Some sources suggested China could use its bond holdings as economic leverage.
So this raises questions about Trump's real motives again. Was it a strategic play, like Scott Besson suggested, make China the bad guy, then look reasonable by backing down?
That's one theory. Or was it just a forced retreat because the markets panicked and his own allies pushed back?
The conflicting numbers didn't help either. First, 125%. Then the White House mentioned 145%, including previous tariffs. it was confusing.
That lack of clarity, that sense of improvisation, it definitely creates international uncertainty.
Yeah.
It can damage trust, make the U.S. seem like an unreliable partner.
And businesses hate uncertainty. We also heard about this tactic, quite clever really, of Chinese goods being rerouted through Vietnam to dodge the U.S. tariffs.
Yeah, that shows how adaptable global supply chains can be. They find ways around trade barriers.
And then the irony. The Chinese embassy in the U.S. sharing that old video of Ronald Reagan arguing against tariffs.
Reagan, a Republican icon. Talk about a contrast with Trump's protectionism.
What do you make of that move by the Chinese embassy?
It's pretty sharp diplomacy, isn't it? Highlighting the contradiction, appealing perhaps to traditional free trade Republicans.
Yeah.
It points out the inconsistency in the U.S. stance.
And underlying all this, of course, is that persistent U.S. trade deficit with China. That's clearly still a major driver for U.S. policy actions.
Undeniably. It's the backdrop to almost all of these tensions.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at Spain's role in this global picture. Amidst all the U.S.-China drama, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez visited China.
Yeah, the stated goal was strengthening ties. But the timing was interesting.
And it certainly got reactions, particularly that warning from the U.S. Treasury Secretary.
That was pretty blunt, wasn't it? Saying Spain negotiating with China would be like cutting off your own neck. Strong words from an ally.
It really shows the U.S. concern about its partners getting too close to China, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But within Spain, the view wasn't monolithic.
Right. You had Juanma Moreno Bonilla from the opposition People's Party, PP, acknowledging how important Asian markets, including China, are for regions like Andalusia.
Which is interesting because didn't the PP itself sign some kind of cooperation agreement with the Chinese Communist Party back in 2013?
They did, a memorandum of understanding for exchange and cooperation. So there's a bit of a contrast with some of the current PP rhetoric criticizing Sanchez's trip.
It highlights that tension between political posturing and practical economic interests, I suppose. Accessing huge markets like China is a powerful pull, regardless of ideology.
Then you had Vox on the far right taking a hard line as expected, calling the Chinese regime communist and genocidal, slamming Sanchez's approach.
And China, for its part, voiced support for Spain and criticized the U.S. use of tariffs. It's a complex web of statements and positions.
It really paints a picture of a shifting geopolitical landscape, doesn't it? Alliances aren't as fixed, tensions are flaring up in new ways.
Definitely. China is clearly positioning itself as a counterweight to U.S. influence, offering alternative partnerships even to traditional U.S. allies.
Now, just briefly, because it was mentioned in the sources and adds local context, there was also this political controversy bubbling up within Spain itself.
Ah, yes. Concerning Isabel Díaz Ayuso, the president of the Madrid region, and her partner.
Right. Her partner facing investigation for alleged tax fraud, business corruption, disloyal administration, I think.
Yeah, and some specific details emerged, like alleged 5,000 monthly payments for part of their residence to a company, Bavia, and buying a company with hardly any assets for €500,000 from the wife of an executive at Curon, a healthcare group.
Details that, as reported, raised quite a few questions about the ethics and legality of it all.
And the timing of Ayuso's trip to Ecuador while her partner was due in court didn't exactly quiet the criticism from the opposition.
No, it fueled it. And separately, there was also that minor debate in Madrid about dedicating a plaque and rehearsal space to a singer, Mario Vaquerizo, given his political leanings. Small scale, but
perhaps indicative of wider tensions. Even these local issues can reflect broader political polarization and scrutiny.
And connecting back to the main theme, you had former Prime Minister Jose Maria Aznar criticizing Sanchez's China trip, echoing that U.S. stance.
Right. Advocating for Spain to align more closely with the U.S., it just shows how interconnected these global and local political dynamics really are.
So wrapping this deep dive up, what we've seen is this incredibly complex interplay of global economic forces.
Yeah, fragile trade relationships, sudden policy shifts, and significant domestic political fallout in various countries.
I think the key takeaway, if there is one, seems to be the sense of, well, maybe a weakening of that unchallenged U.S. economic dominance.
I agree. And a corresponding rise in the assertiveness of other major players, like the EU and definitely China. It doesn't feel like a unipolar world anymore where Washington's decisions go unanswered.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on. What are the long-term implications of these shifts? Are we genuinely moving towards a multipolar economic world with several centers of power calling the shots?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's fascinating and, frankly, crucial to watch how this unfolds in the coming years. Being informed and thinking critically about these events is more important than ever.